Thank you, Ashok, and it's great seeing you both again.
Eric, sounds like we made you do some work from home now. Your
A
work-life
little.
balance.
Well, we're still here in the office for in our day. You guys are at home, but
Okay.
are you able to see the
Okay.
slides okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I would firstly like to say thank you again for organizing this time. And my partners have shared a lot on anatomy and surgical videos of technique. I'm going to talk a little bit about our research collaboratives, specifically focusing on olfactory neuroblastoma, because it's been an area of some strong interest in our team. And I think we have some nice insights that hopefully we can share. So, we've been interested in olfactory neuroblastoma for quite a while, both in some prognostics as well as some correlation with histopathology. This is an early single institutional paper where we looked at the role of SSTR2, which is becoming an increasingly important part of the management of these neuroendocrine tumors. In our series, we actually found really no significant clinical prognostic value with them. But you can see that almost all of our SSTR2s, which are for this particular tumor type, were expressed. We had very few without. But what it does implicate is the potential for different kinds of therapeutic modulation, particularly that of using dotatate to image in a functional way rather than using solely FDG avidity and glucose uptake. And this is an example of that shown here. Similarly, we looked at some straightforward ratios that often have been prognostic with other solid state tumors. The most classic of this, which is a neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. And this sort of measures to a degree how much local inflammation is within the tissue and maybe serve as a marker for immunologic response. And as we all know, immunotherapy has become a greater and greater important factor. And what we're able to show in this is that in more advanced tumors, i.e. Kadish C or D, which means intracranial disease versus those without, that they have a higher neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. So that means there's more inflammation, but less of the preferred lymphocytes that may actually regulate a situation. So this is some early single institutional work that we've done. But really, with olfactory neuroblastoma, it is quite difficult to do this research, even in a high volume center. And I feel like we're fortunate to have a great number of patients who come to see us for this particular disease disorder. So this began one of our research collaboratives. We've talked quite a bit about our proud tradition of wonderful trainees. And so we combine this in something that's often we term the skull-based think tank. So these are individuals who have spent some time in their training at the University of Pittsburgh here, and now are throughout North America. And we group together intermittently to create these research consortiums. And one of our first undertakings was that of olfactory neuroblastoma. Garrett Chobe and Matt Gelsiler helped lead this charge of getting really granular data on olfactory neuroblastoma. And the next works I'm going to present on behalf of the group are really a reflection of that work. So the first thing that we have known for quite a while is that staging of olfactory neuroblastoma is not terrific because it's based solely on anatomy. So what we know about ONB is that in general, the 5-year overall survival is quite favorable. But delayed recurrences and then the consequences of that delayed recurrence can be quite significant. Well, and overall survival reflects that when you start taking time periods out to 10 years. So rather than the traditional squamous cell carcinoma literature, which really focuses on the 5-year time frame, we need to look more distally because a lot of our recurrences can occur late. So these are some of the accepted staging systems at present, with probably the most commonly used is the modified Kadish or Morita Kadish staging system. But the reality is that no olfactory neuroblastoma staging system really correlates with prognosis at 10 years. So we kind of thought, are there ways that we can change that? And this is a great example of the limitations of our current systems. So using Kadish as the example, I think intuitively, most people would recognize that these two tumors are different. And yet, by our staging systems, they are both listed as Kadish C, and then hence grouped together and clumped together in all of our subsequent analysis. one of the most key factors that has come about in the last 15 years has been the concept of the Himes grade. So this is still a subjective grading system, which has a variety of different markers and does require some expertise from a pathologist to understand. But essentially, if you group these lower 1-2 grades with higher 3-4 grades, there seems to be quite a bit of prognostics in regards to disease-free survival, nodal involvement, and also intradural disease. So here's an example of this. When you look at overall survival with a low Himes grade, the Kaplan-Meier curve is favorable over that of a high Himes grade. This is even more stout when you separate these higher Himes grade 4. And then when you look at dural involvement, this is greater when you have a higher Himes grade. So again, suggesting not only more aggressive disease overall, but more aggressive local disease. And then finally, progression-free survival is shown here. So this led to this manuscript. You can see my partner, Ch6b, who will be speaking next, was the first author on this, and our team is all listed here. And these are all, at least one member of the team came from the Pittsburgh lineage. So this had a cohort of 256 patients with, we think, very granular and confirmable data. Again, as expected, with the majority having a high Keynote stage. The neck disease is a little bit higher in this cohort than some of the others, but sort of the expected 60 to 66% are low, while the other third tends to be the high grade Himes by Himes criteria. So when you look at overall survival, a smaller Keynote did have some difference because it's a larger cohort, but the Himes grade really had a similar separation. And so anatomic staging, concurrent with histologic staging, has the potential to help us predict who will do better when we group them together rather than independently. And similarly with distant regional disease. And similar patterns are shown here in the progression-free survival in both cohorts. So this is a way of predicting how good a staging system is. And 0.5 basically means is a coin flip. You know, like if you flipped a coin, you would say it. And you can see that some of our staging systems are not really that much better when you look at these 3 key areas. But when you incorporate Himes grade, low and high, into this staging systems, now we're able to get some improved separation among these varying groups. And so with this, we proposed the Pittsburgh OMB staging system, which really focuses on the simplest, the Morita-Kadish staging system, incorporating low and Himes grade to give us subclassifications, so 8 total stages rather than 4. And you see that although in the lower ones, we don't really have that high a degree of separation, when you start to get to the higher stage diseases, now the progression-free survival really begins to separate out tremendously. Okay, and one could even argue that a Kadish C with high Himes grade might actually need to be greater than a stage 7, but we use this as our initial foray into it. So going back to the example that's demonstrated here, this is a stage 5 in the novel Pittsburgh staging system, and the hazard ratio for disease progression is 3.6, while this is closer to 9, and that actually much more reflects, I think, the clinical state that most of us recognize and understand. All right. So I think that the incorporation of the Pittsburgh OMB staging system, which uses Himes grade with anatomical staging, allows us to predict these key factors, for specifically that progression-free survival with more advanced tumors. All right. So what are the other factors? Well, we know that dural invasion and neck disease are not good portends of outcome. So we began to try to look into this as well. So using this same cohort, Matt Geltzeiler, who is in Oregon now and one of our former fellows, really wanted to try to understand who are the patients who don't have any evidence of intracranial involvement on their imaging, but who may actually have occult intracranial disease. And our team has historically resected at least the ipsilateral dura and bulb for all olfactory neuroblastomas because of some anecdotal scenarios. And so we sought to really clarify this particular issue. So we had, of the larger cohort, we had 66 who had no skull-based involvement on imaging, a K-A, and 8 of those patients had pathologic involvement of their either their bulb or the dura. So it's difficult to interpret this number. In an ideal situation, this number would have been 3%, and it would probably said maybe we shouldn't resect the skull base when imaging is negative. In contrast, if the number was 40% or 30%, I think it would be quite straightforward to say we should do it in every particular scenario. Head and neck oncology has used the 10 to 15% cutoff number for elective neck dissection for the N0 neck, but this is also a different scenario with intracranial involvement likely being a significant worse portent. So can we dissect into this a little bit more? And not surprisingly, again, Heim's grade came out to be a significant factor. So in the patients who had occult disease, those with higher Heim's grade were more likely to be involved. And interestingly, in those with no intracranial findings, only 1.5% of those actually occurred intracranially. So based on this, I think that patients with low Heim's grade tumors that do not involve the skull base in imaging, it could be considered to decide to do a extracranial surgery entirely without elective skull base resection. I think it's a reasonable, at least, consideration that we should offer the patient. Okay. So what about the neck? This is a multi-center collaborative, actually led by Richard Harvey, trying to understand what to do with the neck. And essentially the conclusion here was the risk factor for primary neck disease was higher Heim's grade, and those with delayed neck recurrences tend to have positive margins. So we started looking into this recurrence issue as well. And 30% of the patients in this cohort had recurrence, at least documented recurrence, with unfortunately the majority of them being local, okay? And so recurrences were associated with more advanced tumor stage and overall stage, as well as, again, more intracranial disease. But the key things that we could do something about are when pathologic dural involvement is present, and then when positive margins are also present. And the interesting thing about this cohort was that if you start to separate where the disease recurrence occurred, that actually has some prognostic value. So when we manage disease that's local, which is here in the here in the maroon, versus purple, which is in the neck, actually these patients really have improved outcome when you compare it to other intracranial disease, and then the green outline is distant recurrences. So there is a separation depending on when the recurrence occurs that is actually quite important for this particular disease process. Finally, we looked at the role of dural invasion in regional neck recurrences. So Dr. Ch6b, when he was at Mayo Clinic, published some work that demonstrated that in that single institutional cohort, that pathologic dural involvement was associated with regional disease. And so we wanted to validate this in this larger cohort that we have available here. This was published just less than 6 months ago now. That really demonstrates this, again, the dural involvement is associated with more significant regional neck disease, and again, correlates with the same recurrence-free survivals. Diving into this, you can see here on the multivariate regression analysis that this was the key factor for regional or neck recurrences, was pathologic dural involvement on the initial resection. So we tried to understand, what is there in those individuals who have neck disease from the onset, do they have worse overall survival? And unfortunately, I think that one of the issues with this is actually, even with this fairly large 9-center cohort, not that many patients who have neck disease on presentation. In one of the initial papers we were on, we had 7.7%. In this cohort, 10.7%. So still actually a very small number. So no differences in their recurrences, but their overall survival, if you have neck disease at presentation, was 37.8 at 5, compared to none, which has a more standard 36.7. So we think with more power, as we continue to enlarge these cohorts, we may be able to understand what that prognostic value is in understanding early neck disease, at least on presentation. So with that, I hope I gave you a little interesting overview on some of the research that our team is doing, particularly in this unique cancer. We look forward to more collaborations, and again, thanks for allowing me to be here today.
Stealth Station ENT, the advanced image guidance system for the full range of navigated ENT procedures. Engineered with you in mind, based on decades of scientific, clinical, and engineering expertise, we're expanding what was previously possible with image-guided surgery. Flexible and elegantly designed, Stealth Station ENT streamlines the workflow so you can maintain focus. The flat, under-the-head emitter allows for an efficient setup. Its design allows for a large EM field. Easily find your patient's exam through a variety of network options, super speed USB or optical disc. The visualization and modeling features give you the perspective you need. Leverage data from multiple sources to create high-resolution 3D images. View structures and pathology with high fidelity. Registration expertly matches the three-dimensional positioning of the patient with the preoperative images used for navigation. Patient registration combines registration methods and provides numerical and visual accuracy feedback. Leverage the latest technology for advanced surgeries. See more, do more. The result? You have an image-guided perspective like never before. With Stealth Station ENT, you're at the forefront of ENT surgery. You are Stealth.